Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. To anybody who's going to watch this or join us live, thank you for joining us. Thank you to anyone who will watch this interview as a recorded interview. Thanks for your interest and for your support. We have another guest African composer with us today. I will allow her to introduce herself. Before she does, I'd like to find out how our guest composer is doing. How are you doing in this climate, talking about COVID-19? Are you okay where you are?
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm very fortunate to live on a rather nice spot on the mountain overlooking the sea. So that helps a lot. Gives you a
Okay.
good perspective. Yeah.
Okay, so it's
So,
good to hear you're doing well. All right, so we'll get right into it then. Tell us about yourself.
well, firstly, just thank you, Edwida, for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited about this. And I think it's a fantastic thing that you're doing. And yeah, I encourage a lot more interviews and those people that are watching to go and listen to all the other interviews. I'm sure will be
Okay.
stunning too. So yes, so introducing myself. Well, I was born in the UK, but my parents moved to South Africa when I was 1 year old. So, in fact, I consider myself totally South African, having been brought up here. I went to junior school here, high school here, and university in Cape Town, and I still live here. So, I'm very happy living in Cape Town. It's a stunning place, and it's really suited my creativity, I must say. My upbringing was very creative and musical. Both my parents encouraged a lot of creativity, music, dance. In fact, my father played in a jazz clarinet in a jazz band, and then he took up the classical guitar after doing a lot of skin diving. He had some sunburn on his lips, so he then decided the guitar was the way to go. And he ended up building 9 classical guitars. Of course, one of them became my instrument, so that was very special. And that was from about 11 years of age. So I didn't start music so very young, but yeah, certainly caught up. For my sister Carol, they bought a piano, thinking maybe with me doing guitar, she should do piano. But then she preferred dancing, and she eventually became a prima ballerina, actually, with Cape Town Ballet Company at the time. So then, of course, the piano was sitting there. So guess what? Of course, I had to just try it out. And I also fell in love with the piano. So it was both guitar and piano. And then I was fortunate to eventually do music as a subject at high school. And that helped a lot because I did both instruments, piano and guitar. And eventually I auditioned for university for my undergraduate program, and I was accepted to do both piano and guitar. So I consider that a lot of my really good music education was because of the piano, because at the time in South Africa we didn't have a tradition of classical guitar tuition. So although I had a very exciting teacher who was very motivating, he himself was still undergoing classes and trying to get a following going in Cape Town at the time. But I did eventually, through my university education, Professor Peter Klatzer had introduced a contemporary music program, and that was fantastic because I got a chance to hear a lot of more contemporary composers' performances by people like Morton Feldman, Webern, and many other contemporary composers, including South African composers. So yeah, so it was my classical guitar was then continuing with Uliano Marchio at the time. But I also did during my music studies, I also did things like drama, dancing, and choir. So I had a very wonderfully rounded music education, I would say. But my undergraduate diploma was in teaching and not in composition. So I was scheduled to become a teacher as soon as I left university. And then in my last year of university, I undertook some master classes. I'd firstly done a master class with Alice Arts, who'd come all the way from the US of A to Cape Town, and she gave master classes, and I did hers. And then in my last year, Ernesto Betwitti came. He was originally from Argentina, um, but then he was performing in Spain quite a lot, and he performed some concertos here in Cape Town as well. So I was fortunate to do master classes with him, and then he suggested, well, when I finished university, I should actually perhaps come and study with him in Madrid. So that was all very exciting, and wondering, well, how am I going to get from Cape Town to Madrid? In those days, it was not easy. The exchange rate was probably as bad as it is now for us to travel out of the country. So that was a bit of a problem. But I was fortunate to have a grandfather who helped and assisted me with some finances. But before I went to Spain, I actually I had a wonderful short lectureship post in Windhoek in Namibia, in a conservatoire there, which was originally run by Dietrich Wagner, and he had set up a fantastic guitar department there. So that was very thriving, and I had a lovely time there, and that also enabled me to save up some funds for my trip to Spain. So then I did go to Spain, and then I had the master classes and studied under Ernesto Betwitti. And then I also auditioned for a scholarship at Santiago de Compostela, which was founded by the father of classical guitar, Andres Segovia. And but I wasn't taught by Segovia. He was in his very late years then. But it was a pupil of his called Jose Tomas. So I had lessons with Jose Tomas. And that was all very special. And that was really my first introduction to international guitarists and guitarists from all different parts of the world and different techniques and different styles. So, of course, I got quite involved in the typical Spanish music at that time. After my Spanish trip, I returned to South Africa. And there wasn't really, I always wanted to perform contemporary music, actually. So I was hoping to become a performer of contemporary music, but there wasn't really any opportunity for that in South Africa at the time. So I ended up falling back on some of my previous disciplines, which were singing and dancing. And I got myself into some fun musicals that were put on by Joan Hill and Louis Burke. And so I did a bit of a short stint in professional dancing and in musicals, which I loved, and that was fun. And then also television in our country was kind of starting up. So so then I was involved in dancing on television as well. And then I got interested in behind the camera things and started learning about, how to do a bit of script writing and then putting on some small little documentaries. So I was very fortunate to have an incredibly rounded off education in the arts generally. So we haven't got to the composition part yet, but we're getting there. So during this period of the TV, I started arranging music, and some of my arrangements were then televised. And so that was a sort of start. So I started first of all, by really arranging music, and that taught me quite a few skills. And then I was also, again, lucky to have some super people, Jerry Bosman at the time, who gave me some breaks in my television career. So then after that, I went back to my classical guitar performing, and I met up with John Silver, who was a classical guitarist as well. He'd also studied in London, and we started playing duos. And our first recording was a full LP of classical music for guitar. Then the second year, we decided, this was at the time in South Africa when a lot of interesting things were happening cross-culturally. We had Johnny Clegg on the sort of pop music scene, combining with Jaluka and starting his, his music. And I decided that it would be nice to take African music and do it on classical guitar and sort of combine African ethno music with Western traditional music and see how that worked out. So that's what I started composing first. But before I did that, I decided, like my television career had taught me, if you're an actress, you have to be in the place and study the music of the people and experience it all. So I took a trip around South Africa this was still during apartheid, but I found all the homeland areas, and which were then it was called separate development then, and all the ethnic groups had their own different homeland areas, and there were quite a few. And that took me a good year of just traveling around. But what I discovered, which was fantastic, was that the people were just wonderful. They were warm, inviting, and embracing, and they were so intrigued and interested in what I was trying to do. Often we had to use an interpreter because I didn't speak any African languages at the time. I still don't, which is really bad, I think. But yeah, that's something. It's one of my wish lists I need to do. So it was fascinating, and even through the interpreters, I was able to meet with. For example, we went to the north, and I met with Majaji, the 5th dynasty of the Rain Queen Majaji, and then I was fortunate to be able to come back and film her ceremony, her rain-making ceremony, because she's famed for rain-making, and part of the Lobedo tribe right in the north, which is now Limpopo area, or was Limpopo area, which is now right in the north of South Africa. And then from there, we filmed her, the Majaji, the Rain Queen, Gamano drums and ceremony, and that was fantastic. And then I took a trip also to KwaZulu-Natal, which is on the East Coast. And there I was able to meet with a Sangoma, so a medicine woman who told me a lot about my life and what I need to fix in my life. That was kind of interesting. But I was explaining to her that I wanted to meet her and understand what Sangoma did and try to get inside the experience of what a Sangoma goes through. And then I did all that. So that was interesting. And she had a lot to share and threw the bones for me and told me all kinds of things about my life. So I learned a lot from that, and I used a lot of that experience in my music when I got back to composing it. And then I also took a trip to Botswana, to the Okavango swamps. That was an interesting little trip in a little 6-seater aeroplane. And we landed on a very bumpy runway and siphoned fuel from the wing of the plane. And then we went camping in the wild, basically, and almost swimming with the crocodiles, and luckily didn't get swallowed up by one. But the beauty of the place was what struck me there. And one of my main pieces, that's perhaps my most famous piece for guitar, is called Makoro, Song of the Water. And
we're going to listen to it later. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so that piece has got a bird call in it called a fish eagle, and it does this gorgeous cry. And I was able to make these sounds on the guitar acoustically without any additional amplification or any kind of gadgets or anything. And then also the sound of the thumb piano, the little Sansa thumb piano that the Africans used to play their instruments on, or their music on. It's just a little wooden piece with metal strips on it. The thumb piano sound I was able to capture on the guitar by putting press stick under the sticky tape, what we call sticky tape, under the strings of the guitar, and it sort of gave a kind of a muted tinny sound, and the sticky tape rattled on the front of the instrument and gave it quite an interesting timbre. So I used that in that piece. And then also I used other sounds like the marimba, the African marimba. I put some press stick onto the strings of guitar, so it became like prepared guitar techniques. Not quite John Cage with the piano, but prepared guitar techniques, and using this press stick on the strings gave a beautifully muted sound.
Okay, all right.
I also used it in another one of my trips, which was to the Bushman. I used a good harp sound. The good harp is just a single string on a kind of, almost looks like the bow and arrow idea, and being the bow, and then having a gourd on it, an empty gourd, which you then hold against the body. And I hit it with a porcupine quill, and the porcupine quill, you depress the string in one place, and then it has two notes basically, and the wah 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 kind of sound you do by moving the gourd back and forth. And on the guitar I was able to capture that quite well by doing pulling the strings down and at the same time sort of doing a big lateral kind of vibrato, and that worked nicely. So that was used in the Bushman piece. I also used in the Bushman piece a gourd which had seeds in it, and to get their Bushman rattle sound when they do the dances. These are the Khoisan people. When they dance in the sand, they used to wear the Bushman rattles around their ankles, and it created this gorgeous sort of sandy rubbing kind of sound. And I used that by hitting the gourd on the strings. So those were all some of the things that I did in my African, my could call my phase of going through, trying to do something as a white South African, combining African music with Western music. And I wove the compositions around tone poem stories. So I actually used the stories that the Bushmen used, like the tale of the snake who lost his legs and things like that. So that became like a program for the actual music. So that was quite fun. And then we eventually did a recording of all this. I performed it in South Africa, all over South Africa. We did a recording called African Evenings at the time. I'd written it for 2 guitars, and that was still with John Silver. And then eventually I was able to get performances overseas. And I was able to perform with another guitarist in London. There was Timothy Walker, who was a lecturer at the Royal Academy of Music. He did the live performance for me. And then I also did some South African embassy concerts, because now this was during the era when things weren't very mixed. And Timothy Walker would have been boycotted if he'd done the embassy concerts. And at the same time, the embassy concerts, South Africa at the time, was intent on moving over to, we already knew a year before the time that they were already thinking about Mandela becoming president. And we were told this, and we didn't believe it at the time. But that was a year before the time, before it happened. And then eventually, of course, Mandela was released. And at that particular time, I was actually living in America. I had lived in America on and off for 3 years. That time I decided it was when I saw Mandela being released, it was definitely time to come home. So I'd performed in Europe, and then I'd performed in America, and then I came back to South Africa and then carried on my career in music and more into a lot more music composition. So I continued in my compositional career working with dancers, because obviously I'd had a dancing career, and my sister was a prima ballerina. So it made sense to write for dance, and I love both. So that was special. So I started doing commissions for Sylvia Glasser, who started a company called Moving Into Dance. She was also one of the first multiracial dance companies at the time. So that was quite special. And then I also worked for Robin Orlin, another choreographer who did some very interesting contemporary choreography. And then my sister and I did a piece together called In the Light, and that was quite special. So, and then, so I did a lot of work with dancing and so on. And those were often commissioned by, we had a Creative Arts Foundation then, and SAMRO. So I'd become a member of SAMRO, and I was doing commissions for them. And then I started a music academy, the Cape Town Academy of Music.
We are going to talk about that. Yes, we're going to talk about a number of these topics later.
Yes.
I will let you just round up the introduction so that we can.
Yes, I'm just going to. So then I eventually, some years later, I did my master's in music. I'd wanted to do it in composition, but Hendrik Hofmeyer at the time discouraged me for some strange reason, and decided I should do it in research. So I learned another skill, how to do research, and I wrote a whole thesis. And the master's was on classical South African composers for the classical guitar. We thought there were a handful, and I discovered a huge amount, like 72 with some 350 works. So that was enormous. And then several years later, I then decided I wanted to do still my composition degree. And so now what was left was the doctorate. So finally, at the very end of it, I finally did the doctorate in composition. And my supervisor was Professor Hans Rosenskoen, who was just wonderful. He gave me a lot of freedom, but he was very good with the orchestration, because that was the area I really needed to fine tune. And so I'd written a lot of ensemble music, but not for big orchestras. So that was stunning. And I did that through the Nelson Mandela University with Mons Rosenskroon as my supervisor. And it was a 2-act ballet I wrote, Vulcanus. And then the other major work of the portfolio was a 9-movement work called the Feinbos Suite. And that was inspired by the paintings of my partner, Stephen Fellmore. And he does stunning award-winning paintings, and that became the other major work for the doctorate.
Okay, so I think we will sort of bring it. I mean, it's been a brilliant introduction, but because I want us to discuss some of these topics, I don't want to just go over them as part of an introduction. So I mean, I think we should just maybe go straight into playing one of your works now. We have about, and I'm sorry to have to mention this to everybody watching, but we have about 25 minutes left on this interview because it's scheduled for 45 minutes. So I will go straight in and play one of our guest composer's works. She has mentioned a number of topics today, and she sort of preempted a number of what we are going to watch today. So let me just go straight into one of the works she has referred to. She talked about a 2-act ballet, Vulcanus, and there is this beautiful composition, or if I may say so myself, it's called Beneath the Waves. So let's sit back, everybody, and enjoy listening to Beneath the Wave by our guest composer of today. So that was Beneath the Waves by our guest composer of today. I think that that's a beautiful piece, a beautiful composition. And you did talk about your sister being a ballerina. You talked about yourself being involved in dance as well. Can you hear
Yes.
me? Okay, good.
And your voice is going through. Shall I put the earphones in just to
Okay.
see? Maybe it was
All
just
right.
echoing slightly there. Okay, that's better.
Okay, good. You talked about your sister being involved in dance and you also being involved in dance. Because of the fact that we are quite constrained now time wise, I will move on to an
Yes.
earlier topic if you don't mind. But I think that was interesting for our audience to watch. We have 5 people watching us live. The number goes up and down as we go along, but it's good. Thank you very much for joining us live. So let's go back to an earlier period. You talked about having a musical background, which seems to have helped in a way, unless I'm wrong. But did you have any detractors as a child when you started around the age of 11? Because your father seemed to have been encouraging. You talk about your grandfather as well. Was anybody coming around and saying this is a waste of time, don't get involved in music? Or is South Africa at that time anyway, at that time, was the country the kind of country that appreciated music?
Your voice is doing a double echo. I can't actually hear what your question was.
Okay.
So unfortunately,
maybe I should slow down. Does that help?
Try with.
Okay. Did you have any detractors when you started? Oh, I can hear the echo myself. If you plug the headset in, no detractors.
Oh, no. This is good. I can't.
Sorry, everybody who's watching us. Just
hear you.
A few seconds to sort out our technology. This happens. So let's try one more time. Did you have any detractors as a child? Exactly. Yeah. Question. Did you have any source of discouragement as a child when you started down the musical path?
Not from my parents. They were very encouraging and very supportive. Not from my school at the time. The school was also very supportive and very good. I think the difficulty came more when I went to university. And I think for me, I think being a female at the time was perhaps a bit more tricky than I think the guys got it slightly easier, if I may say so. So, but anyway, I still did what I could, and I still pushed through.
Okay.
But I wasn't I wasn't like encouraged very easily by some of the male staff, I would say. So that's a bit of a difficult one, and it's probably a problem a lot of females face anyway.
Okay.
Or maybe it's just our own insecurity.
But you have become a successful composer, by any standards. You are a successful composer. But you said you started out arranging music and that you learned some skills. What did you learn when you started out arranging? How did that help?
Actually, yeah, what happened a lot in my life was sometimes people would just say to me, why are you playing other people's music? Why don't you do your own music? Why don't you, arrange or do other music? So I actually took that on board, and I literally would do what people would say. So if I found somebody who'd encouraged me, I would leap at the encouragement. So I would like dive in really, really strongly once I was encouraged. And I never really thought about the negatives. So that was perhaps a good thing in some ways. And then sometimes the negatives came afterwards, but generally speaking, I would just dive in and go for it. And however it came out, it obviously there was enough general good musical education that helped me do reasonably okay arrangements. So, and then I'd obviously work on a keyboard and put the parts together that way. But it was all handwritten in the early days. So I've still got music that's handwritten that I would like to put onto the computer.
So how did that? So basically, that fed into you becoming a composer, is what you're saying? Starting with
Yes, yes.
being an arranger, okay. But you've mentioned quite a number of instruments, and we just listened to one of your compositions. You do compose for quite a variety of instruments, but the guitar does stand out. Is that your favorite instrument to compose for?
Well, obviously, having been a performer on guitar, a large part of my career was performing all over. So, it made sense to write for the instrument, and it also made sense because then I could perform my own music. So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of playing of my own music. So I
But
was fortunate that
that's
yes.
one of the questions I do like to bring up. Well, I used to bring it up quite a lot, but I've kind of stopped now over several interviews. Is the question about getting performed? You just said you could perform your own music. And I think that's probably a good advice for a lot of composers if they can perhaps perform their own music, but not everybody can. If you write for voice, maybe if you write for a four-part group, you can't perform your own music. But let's just bring this question to the beginning of the interview, I suppose. Do you have any recommendations for African composers who might be struggling to have their works performed?
I lost your voice there. Sorry.
Okay. Have you got any recommendations for African composers who might be struggling to get their works performed?
Yeah. So if you want to get your own music performed, then obviously you need to court performers, and you need to be, friendly with performers, and you need to encourage them to play your works, and that's that's a skill all in itself, I suppose. Is that what you were meaning? I didn't hear the very first part of your question.
Oh no, that is you are answering the question. It's just interesting to hear that they should be
Hello?
friendly. Hello, can you hear me? It's just interesting to hear you say they should be friendly because sometimes these things cost money or some choirs don't
Oh,
want to perform.
well, yes, and then of course you need to do fundraising and things like that if you want to if you need to pay the performers. I mean, obviously, some performers, if you're friendly with them, they might perform your works, but otherwise you need to hire them for performing, and that can get expensive. And I've done plenty of fundraising in my time too. I put on
Okay.
an international classical guitar festival, and for a whole year I was a fundraiser. That's what I did. So
Okay.
it's hard work, I must say.
All
You
right.
have to be multi-skilled in a lot of things. So
Let's talk about your
yeah, with the French,
international.
was also part of the doctorate. I wanted to make a recording of that, and so I did. I had to pay the performers and hire the recording studio and everything for that. So yeah, it can get quite expensive. So luckily, with my teaching, I'm able to. I basically use my teaching to fund all my other activities.
All right.
My teaching is the bread and butter money, and then from that, I'm able to fund some of my creative activities.
All right. Let's talk about one of your activities. I think you have something planned for July 2021. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay. You are
yes, I
the
can hear you now.
artistic director for a guitar orchestra retreat that's taking place
Yes,
was planned for July 2021. What's the
yes,
plan
we
for
were
that
supposed to
event?
do it. Yes, we were supposed to do it now this year in July, but of course COVID got in the way, and so I decided it's best to just not even try to do anything this year, and because summer is my long summer overseas, and our winter is our long holidays in the middle of the year, so it's easier for me to travel when I'm not teaching during the June-July holidays. So then that's a good opportunity, and of course it's the summer. And this retreat's going to be in Wales. So we're hoping to premiere some new works for guitar orchestra. And we've still got some who signed up for this year, and they've been so great. They've been able to stay signed up basically for next year. So they didn't ask for their refund, and they're willing to keep holding on till next year. So that says a lot, and I'm very excited to have that opportunity. In fact, you interviewing Robert Fockens, who lives in Wales, and
Yes.
last week, and yeah, so I'll be doing this in the middle. It'll be Central Wales, and it's at a beautiful manor house. We have quite a few guitarists coming to that, and I hope to encourage more international guitarists to come as well.
Okay, let's skip back now to South Africa, away from Britain and Wales for a few seconds. So
Okay.
I'm going to play one of your compositions. You talked about this earlier. Uh, it's called "Song of the Water." So everybody, listen to this composition by our guest composer of today, and then we'll return to the interview, and we'll continue our conversation with our guest.
Now we come to four tone poems, which are some of my favorite works. The first one is called Song of the Water, which is about the Makoro. The Makoro is a wooden dugout canoe that is pulled along, pretty much like a Venice, through, but in this case, through the reedy swamps of the Okavango. I was very fortunate to take a plane trip there, where we landed on a very sandy runway, and then we siphoned fuel from the wing of the plane and put it into the engine of the boat. We putted upstream, and I went swimming with the crocodiles, literally, but I didn't know that I was swimming with the crocodiles, because I only realized later that afternoon when I saw all these shadows along the riverbanks. And I thought, what is that was all crocodiles. Anyway, it was good fun. And so this piece was inspired because of that trip. And what you will hear in it is lots of the way the water sparkles when you've got beautiful sunlight shining on it, is this effect. And then the water insects, not quite your Volterra mosquitoes. And then the other effect is when the Makoro, the wooden dugout canoe, goes through the reeds, it makes this sound. And of course, just to remind you that this really is Africa in its natural state, we have the fish eagle cry. So sit back, pretend you're in a Makoro, floating down in Africa, and enjoy.
So that was Mokoro, Song of the Water by our guest composer of the day. What are your other influences? It's quite clear to hear what inspired that composition, if I may summarize it in that sense. What other inspirations? What are your other sources of inspiration?
Well, oh goodness, obviously nature. Nature's a huge inspiration for me in all its different forms. For that African music, I had studied a lot of Hugh Tracy's original recordings that were housed at the museum at Rhodes, at the Grahamstown Rhodes Memorial, not Rhodes Memorial, sorry, Grahamstown African Music Library. And so that was for that particular work. But otherwise, I think it's just about, I like to write as well. So I write stories, and then the stories themselves become part of your daily life. So they take on characters and things like that, and the music sort of grows out of all of that. So nature, stories, and listening to other works, obviously, other composers as well.
We have less than a minute to go. I don't know if it would be all right if we continue for a bit, like 10 minutes beyond our stop time.
Sure.
Okay, and we hope those who are watching us live will also stay with us, or at least watch it later. This longer interview, longer than what we planned. Okay. Do you have any other composers that you admire, that you, I don't know, imitate slightly, or even generally in everything you do?
Gosh, so that's a difficult one, because I like a huge range of music, and I listen to a really large range of music. So gosh, I don't have any specific favorite composer, except I could say Johann Sebastian Bach, probably, which then is interesting because it doesn't necessarily reflect in my music. But the Feinbos Suite was actually very much a return to a Baroque style, in a sense, because, first of all, there's only really the Bach lute suites for guitar, and I'd wanted to. There's a lot of neoclassicism and a lot of post this and post that, but there really wasn't a lot of neo-Baroque, you could say. So I thought it would be interesting to try to do contemporary harmony with Baroque counterpoint. So that's what I did in the Feinbos Suite. So you could say, of all the composers I admire the most, it would be Hans Sebastian. But having said that, I mean, there's just so many. I wouldn't know where to start. But I do also love romantic music, as probably comes out in my own compositions as well. And I love a lot of contemporary music, but also, popular music. So dance music and Latin music. I love Latin music. So there's a huge variety of styles that I do enjoy.
Okay, we're talking about style. Listening to your music, and you did mention this country earlier. Do you think you have any Spanish influence in, especially when you compose on the guitar?
Yeah, well, I do have a fond liking for Spanish and flamenco music as well. In fact, when I lived in Spain, I was also fortunate in the Madrid area to get involved in a bit of flamenco. I even did a bit of flamenco dancing. And my latest work is a guitar concerto, and it actually does bring in, it's not typically flamenco, but it does bring in some of the dances of the Spanish style. So yeah, you've got a bit of a rumba sound in there, and or rhythmic, rhythmically anyway. Um, and yeah, I do. So I enjoy a lot of Spanish music, and that's definitely featured in my compositions as well. And specifically very much in this last concerto, which I've just written, the concerto for guitar and orchestra.
Hmm. You perform on the guitar. I know I'm dwelling on the guitar a bit, but it's something I guess that will come up if anybody looks up your name on the internet. The guitar is rather prominent to you and next to your name, and is quite easy to associate it with you based on the results that the internet coughs up or provides.
Yes.
Have you seen that kind of interest beyond South Africa, beyond where you are? Are you a bit concerned that there isn't that much interest in guitar music? I mean, I can tell you that I don't think it's that popular when it comes to African composers.
Sorry, it broke up a little bit there, but I get the gist that you were saying the guitar is sort of not so popular internationally or in
Yes,
South Africa.
Well, speaking about the other composers around South Africa and musicians, classical guitar seems to be a niche area. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, it probably is pretty much still a niche area in this country, but definitely not overseas. It's enormous overseas. I mean, there are just so many guitarists worldwide, and so many brilliant guitarists worldwide. So I don't compose necessarily just for here. It would be nice that the South African composers and my own works would be performed more overseas. That would be very nice, because there's plenty of players that are capable of doing it. So, but in South Africa, yes, it is still quite a niche market. But having said that, we do have one or two very strong performers who keep it alive, let's say, and so it's always popular. That's for sure. It's always a popular thing, and it always attracts an audience. So that's a good thing, I think.
Okay. Tell us about your Cape Town Academy of Music.
So I formed the Cape Town Academy of Music in 2000, and it was formed because at that time the country was going through its big changes again, and it always is somehow. But at the time, they were basically considering not having full-time music teachers in schools. So I had a short stint where I had my only time in my entire life where I actually taught in a school as a full-time music teacher, and that was for 7 years. So that was my only full-time actual post that I've held. And then I thought, okay, it's time to start my own academy then, if we're not going to have full-time music teachers in schools anymore. So that's what I did, and it's been going very well. We basically concentrate on piano, guitar, voice, and then I run a course called the Music Artist Diploma, which also covers business entrepreneurship and marketing, because if you are going to be a musician, especially in this country and perhaps worldwide, you need to know how to market yourself, you need to know how to sell yourself, you need to know how to become a product. And so we focus on that. We take young students in their 20s who are passionate about music and want to go into a professional career, and give them the tools to be able to do that. So that's been a very special part of my life as well. And I really enjoy teaching that particular program. We do history of music with it. They do their practical subject. They can do teaching, or they can go into composition or producing. So it's got quite a few avenues that you can take within that diploma.
Well done. It's about 20 years old now, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly.
Well done.
The big
Um,
celebration. Yeah.
yeah, I can imagine. You said you focus mainly at the academy on the guitar, piano, and voice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in combination or also as separate instruments?
No, they can do 2 or 3 instruments if they're able to, if they want to and able to, and show enough skills and talent in them. Yes. The main reason we don't do orchestral instruments is because we have a couple of schools in Cape Town that focus on orchestral instruments. So they go to Beausoleil, for example, for that.
Okay.
Students at school and post school go to Beausoleil for orchestral training. And then, of course, the orchestra here itself has an outreach program which goes into the township areas and does that kind of thing. We used to have just this year, unfortunately, our South African Music Rights Organization was very supportive. They had a foundation that used to support us to sponsor, previously disadvantaged children to come to our academy. And just this year, exactly as COVID hit, they pulled away from being able to sponsor anything anymore. So that's very sad. So that's actually quite tragic. So I don't know how it's going to be coming out of this, but I'm an optimist. And I'll always do what I can do. And by God's grace, perhaps we'll get some funding and be able to carry on that initiative, because we have helped quite a few students who weren't able to afford tuition fees with coming to the academy.
Yeah, let's continue to hope for positive changes.
Mm.
You said that the students can work in combination, so work on a combination of those 3 instruments or just one. Now, Africa does have quite a few composers who compose for voice and for piano. Your students work on different kinds of music, I suppose. Do they work on the music of African composers as well? Is that part of the curriculum?
Yes, we do. We do touch on African composers, and we have a component. Well, in the history program, especially, we have a component that goes through the entire history. So we do we mainly focus on obviously Western music, where it started, in Europe, and then as it becomes more contemporary, we go into popular music as well. We go into contemporary genres. We go into film music. We go into jazz. We go into a whole range of traditional, let's say, popular music styles as well as the African music styles. So we do touch on all that. But yeah, the one thing we haven't done, which as you were talking, I was just thinking about it now, which would be quite nice, is to have sort of African instruments as well. So,
okay.
But there are quite a few teachers who do marimbas, especially in schools. So there's a lot of marimba playing in schools here, I must say. And there hasn't seemed to have been much coming out in terms of doing music artist diplomas or degrees in marimba as such, unless, of course, you are a percussionist, and then you would do that. But that's something, perhaps, that's something to consider. That's quite an interesting thought. It just occurred to me right now. So.
Okay. Okay. And where are you on your PhD journey, by the way? Because you mentioned PhD.
That's finished. I did 4 years, and that took 4 years, and that's finished. So that's all in the bag. And so now I'm actually, I've got into just doing music videos, but to classical music, or classical contemporary music. So basically, that's quite an exciting thing. I've been discovering how to do that during lockdown, how to make videos, video editing. So it's quite a nice tool to have, and I hope to put a lot more of my compositions to video now. So that's a new venture for me.
That's good. That's interesting. It's been really interesting talking to you. It's a shame that we had to rush through the questions. Anybody who watches our interviews will know that we tend to wait for the guests and allow them to answer the questions, but we've had to rush through these because it was a shorter interview, and we've sort of run out of time, basically, or we've not had enough time to discuss as much as we would have loved to. But thank you very much for your time. I am going to actually play something, one of your works under the Feinbos Suite, which you mentioned earlier, the Feinbos Suite. Yeah, so I will play that as we sign out of the interview, but I want to thank you very much for your time. Thank you. The 6 people who are watching us live at the moment, all those who joined us live.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully we'll get a lot more to listen back afterwards.
Yeah, and thank you to all those who've been commenting as well. It's been a brilliant afternoon and a good opportunity to talk to you. So thanks for reaching out. Thanks for your time, and we wish you success with your future endeavors.
Thank you, Edwina, and you too. It's been wonderful. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. So, everybody watching us, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of our guest composers' works. It's from the Feinbos Suite, which she referred to earlier.
There's an undercurrent on a bed of sand, serenely stirring shadows of loss, a breath away, full moons to stay, floodlight drinks the branches of my heart. The crumpled sheets of leaves, your red it shows, embers on a glow. Will you stay or leave this way? Your roots swirling, ready to go. Like the mighty string of a spider's web, are we plucked vibrations of our deepest fears. Thoughts stray, but old days, when there's light on the edge of tears, when there's light on the edge of tears. When evening awakes, our shadows dance delighting secrets, divulging our truth. Stormy silence opposes violence, 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 violence. Yes, only silence opposes violence. Nature sighs with the hope of truth, hope of truth is the hope of truth. Light on the edge, light on the edge of